Welcome. I'm Jessie, and I'm a birth mother.
I'm Carrie, an adoptive mother and an adoptee.
And I'm Marilyn, a transracial adoptee from Haiti, and we are Roots.
Together, we make up the adoption triad. Thank you for joining us as we explore the realities of adoption from our diverse perspectives and knowledge.
We know that each adoption experience is unique and deserves to be valued and respected. We understand that our stories may not be reflective of everyone else's experiences, but we strive to represent the adoption community well.
Please note that in this series, we will delve into thought-provoking topics that may challenge your perspectives, but we encourage you to listen with an open mind and desire to learn. So pull up a seat and let's talk.
Good morning, guys. How's it going?
Hey, ladies, how are y'all? Good.
I'm good. I'm excited. This is our very first Roots video, the one of many, hopefully. So let's introduce ourselves for our new viewers so that they can put a face to the name. My name is Jessie Matos. I'm a birth mother of 13 years. And Delora, if you want to go around the circle. I don't know where you all are, but
I know. I'm Delora, and I'm a birth mother as well. My daughter just turned 37.
And
Marilyn?
I'm Marilyn Mondesir. I am the director of Adoptee Relations, and I'm an adoptee from Haiti.
And I'm Carrie. I am an adoptee also, and also an adoptive parent.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Well, we are really excited to be here. We're really excited about this series, and we want to be able to dive into a lot of different topics surrounding adoption, of course, and maybe some that aren't really talked about often. Today's video, we're going to be discussing the naming process in adoption. As adoption professionals and members of the triad, we see a lot of issues around the naming process. And there doesn't really seem to be a lot of talk about it. It's always an awkward conversation to have. Everyone seems to kind of tiptoe around this process. So what are we doing about it? Why aren't we talking about this enough? So we're going to kind of go through some questions and hopefully be able to provide some good insight to help people kind of problem solve and work through some of these issues. So I'm going to start with you, Delora. What factors influence a birth parent's preference or decision when naming their child during the naming process?
Well, I mean, I think it goes with any child that you're naming. I mean, it's one that a lot of people look at, okay, different cultures might influence how you name your child or what you're wanting to name your child. For me, I always wanted to name my daughter Michelle. Because my last name was Shell. So I always thought she would be a Miss Shell. So I thought that's one way of taking my maiden name and bringing it to my married name. But I placed my daughter, so I didn't really have a choice. I mean, that was 37 years ago. So it's a long story, but she has the name Michelle, which is kind of cool. So, I mean, I just think there are a lot of different reasons. Could be related to a personal experience that you've had, or it could be so many different reasons why we choose certain names. So that's kind of my reason for wanting to name my daughter Michelle. And then, I have similar reasons for wanting to name my son Jackson. I mean, that's a child that I raised, but that's a family name as well. So
yeah, names are so
reasons.
personal. I mean, it's cultural, spiritual, familial, all of the reasons why. And you got to work together to kind of figure this out. I mean, if we're going to, Marilyn, you say the word holistic adoption a lot, which I love. And if we're going to try to make this as holistic as possible, we do have to kind of make this process a little bit more collaborative. And I know for you, you've kind of got this interesting story about your own name, and you don't have to go into detail about it, but could you just discuss the importance of the names and the role that names play for adoptees, for them to really lean into and accept their dual identity? How does that play a role?
Right. First of all, I love that we're having this conversation. It's one of those things that as an adoptee that I've carried and thought about, but really didn't have the words to express until these recent years. And so, my name is Marilyn. I've never really liked my name. And and then recently I found out that my biological family, they call me by a different name, and there's the complexities of the duality of like, so now, okay, So names are very important for adoptees, and it is very important to have that communication with the birth mother, the expectant mother, and the adoptive family because, like you said, culture, family, generational stuff, all of those things come into play. Like my name has Lene, and all of the women in my family have those last three letters. And it might seem like a small thing, but when you are an adoptee, you're grasping for anything. A lot of adoptees are grasping for anything that connects them to their birth culture, and you have generations of names. Like for instance, my sister, she's not adopted, but she carries the middle name Elaine, and that's from my mom. And my mom had, she got that from her grandma. And so how that is generational, and I completely understand it. She's the oldest too, oldest of me. But I never got that. I never knew that. And that always made me feel a little disconnected from my family. And I know it was not an intentional thing, but it's just one of those things that it's just the reality of it. So names are very important. It grounds the adoptee. It gives them a sense of identity in so many ways. And like Maryland is only like a portion of my story. It's just like half my story. And so like the name I was given at birth, that's a different also a part of my story, and it kind of makes it whole.
Well, thank you. Now, Carrie, I know you're both an adoptee and an adoptive parent, so that's an interesting, also another kind of like dual identity that you carry. But how can adoptive parents support a birth parent during the naming process? You know, we're trying to make this a little bit more collaborative than it has been in the past. So, what can adoptive parents do?
Yeah, like you said, I feel like the word, I mean, we're talking about names, but it's collaborate. And as an adoptive parent, that was something that I was kind of looking forward to working with our son's birth mother, expectant mother at the time, on coming up with a name for him. I felt like it was super important that he would have a part of our family and then also his birth family. And so, um, just that collaboration of working together and letting these expectant moms know that we can come up with a name together. Like it can have meaning from if it's, a grandparent, a relative that's passed, if it's like a special, something meaningful to the expectant parent, birth parent, um, just collaborating, if you want to come up with the first name and then the prospective adoptive parents come up with a middle name. But just, I think even as an adoptee, like seeing that all parts of the triad work together to come up with your name would be so special as they got older and they understood that more, that it would just be more meaningful that they collaborated. Like there wasn't, fighting or, only the adoptive parents named the child, but that everyone worked together to come up with a meaningful name that would be, like we say, names are so important. Like that's who you are. Like I'm Carrie, and so just the collaboration I think is key, and it can be kind of intimidating. Sometimes you don't know how to start those conversations,
Yeah.
and I think as adoption professionals, that's where the role they can play of kind of mediating that and being like, okay, we got to have these conversations. Like we can't wait till the hospital room, or you're signing
Right.
papers and you're putting a name down. Like let's talk about it beforehand. Get it out of the way. It's going to be uncomfortable at first, but it's so important. I mean, it's so important, and I think that's key. Is just we've got to have those hard conversations before.
Yeah.
I,
And I
I
think,
feel like Jesse, you and I have talked about this, that if you can get, I mean, the whole point of open adoption is, I mean, the big thing that I think a lot of people miss is that, and adoption professionals sometimes miss, is that we're trying to build relationships here. We're
mhm.
trying to build a relationship between the birth family and the adopted family, and this is like a stepping stone into the first potential, stepping. I mean, thing to help you build that relationship, an obstacle, if you will. And if there's not trust and communication and the openness starting now, it's like with a marriage. If you don't get along before you get married, it is not going to get any better. It's not going to get any
Right.
better. So
Yeah. It's so true. And this whole naming process thing, I know at Abiding Love Charities, we've been working on a tool that'll help agencies and our own agency kind of facilitate these conversations. But you're right, it is a stepping stone into open adoption. And open adoption is a lot of times really, really weird and really uncomfortable because you're taking essentially perfect strangers most of the time and joining them into this extremely intimate relationship with no prior relationship. And so you have to have uncomfortable conversations. You have to ask the awkward questions earlier on so that you don't have to worry about that later. The earlier you have those, the easier it's going to be. And I tell people all the time, if you don't know, just ask.
Yeah.
You know, we were talking about that the other day. You're like, oh, like, how should I, do you think that she would like this? I'm like, well, have you asked her? Have you just maybe
Yeah.
thought to consider what she might prefer? And, that goes into play with the naming process. And we see it a lot, a lot of these issues. And I think if facilitators or agencies were able to facilitate these conversations earlier on, it would also clue them into possibly some issues that the adoptive parents and possibly the birth parents have. We talk about ownership and adoption. And Mirlyn, I would love to hear you kind of your take on this, the whole ownership and possession of adoption and the naming process can have an influence in that. So if you want to elaborate on how the naming process, yeah, influences ownership, take it away.
Yes. And I wanted to add real quick, like, like how you were talking about open adoption. Open adoption is like that big scary word. A lot of people don't want to do it because it is hard. And like I like how you said, like taking complete strangers almost and putting them in intimate relationship. And so having conversations like this, having things, pamphlets or whatever we have helps dispel like that, the myths and the scary part of open adoption because open adoption is best for all parties and within the adoption triad. And ownership, I think that's interesting. Like, huh,
I
can
don't
you
like that
elaborate?
word.
Yeah,
How
like
can well, we talk about like adoption is not about ownership. So how can the naming process
right, right.
influence it in either direction?
Yeah.
Because some people get so possessive over a name, or adoptive parents might get so possessive over a name, or the birth parents, and then they kind of butt heads, and you've got to like work through that. And that's what's
Right.
not happening is
Yeah.
agencies are not facilitating these conversations to be able to work through this. And then there's awkwardness, and then there's the potential for the adoptive parents to change the name later down the road. I mean, we've all heard and we see many horror stories of how the names just can cause a lot of
Yeah.
conflict,
Right.
and it's not about ownership.
Yeah.
It's not adoption is not open adoption is not co-parenting, which I think a lot of people are intimidated by that, like you said, because they fear that like co-parenting feeling. It's not co-parenting, but there's so many aspects of it that are collaborative, and this is one of them. And this is something that you can do from the beginning to encourage that collaboration like we've been talking about. And I
Hmm.
would love to hear some examples from you guys so the audience can hear like this is an issue that we see. I know moms where the adoptive parents they've agreed on a name and then they've changed the name later without telling the birth parent. So they had zero intention of honoring that name. And that is a huge breach of trust because names probably have more importance to adoptees than they do, biological children. Like my name's Jessie. It's just my name. I don't really think about it. It's not a family name. So it is what it is, but they hold so much power for adoptees. So if you've got it, guys got examples of scenarios that maybe did work out or maybe didn't work out, I would love to hear them.
Yeah. So um I'm very active in the adoptee community, and um I don't have statistics behind this, but a lot of the people that I know who are adoptees, not every single adoptee, um, they tend, when they find out that they had a different name at birth, they tend to go through, like, it's a struggle for them, whether they go and they refer back to that name, they change their name, or they struggle with like the dual identity. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. I identify as Marilyn, but I also identify as the other name, and trying to find a place and trying to find like when can I be this person and when can I be that person? It
Mm,
adds just a ton of complexities. And I also believe that, when we talk about adoption, as children, we are in we are in our mother's belly. We feel the sway of her hips. We hear her voice. We smell her. We hear her name. Like it is in us. Like we remember those things, even if we were adopted at birth or 7 years, 7 years in. Those are things that are within us. Um, and so there are names, like there are things that what I'm trying to say is like it's just important to honor those names, talk to the expectant mom, and because a lot of times, yeah, you said I'm always searching for a meaning as an adoptee. And
Mm,
so my name is Marilyn and it means black bird. I hated that growing up. I hated it so much because like my sisters sounded like little lamb. And I'm like, oh, that's sweet. And then my brother, I think he was like a warrior. Okay. And I'm sitting here like a black bird. I'm like, what in the world? And then I'm the only black person in the family. So I'm like, this is just like, like seriously. And so having to work through that. And for people like you're saying, Jesse, who aren't adopted, it might seem so small and trivial
mm,
and just not of a concern, but is those things that, are taken for granted, like knowing, like now that I have kids, I love telling them that if you were a boy, you would have been named this. And these were all the names that we have
mm,
listed, and giving them that and just kind of them being able to play with like, oh my goodness, like I could have been a Naomi, but you chose a different name. Um, those are things I didn't get and other adoptees didn't get. And I'm trying to give that to my children, in a fun way, but it's very important.
yeah, that's good. I love everything that you just said. But how you talked about the adoptees that you know that have changed their name later in life. How should adoptees approach or how should adoptive parents approach that possibility of their adopted child changing their name later in life?
I say check your ego at the door. Um, so it's not about you. And I think that's the
Mm,
hardest thing is, this is we'll talk about it in other videos, but just it's not about you as a parent. It's not that, and I'm being very open. Like I hate Maryland. Like I love Maryland. I'm Maryland, and no offense to, my parents who named me and stuff, but it's not about them. It's not about you. And you have to, just like you have been, I'm assuming you have been supportive and loving and kind and being there for your child. It's the same thing when it comes to a name. They have to explore that because if they want to, the thing is, they're going to explore these things. They're going to
mm,
explore them. So are you going to be there with them while they explored? Or are you going to allow your emotions and your opinions to get in the way of having a very holistic relationship with your child? That's a choice,
mhm.
but
Yeah,
they're going to keep looking and they're going to keep searching and figuring out who they are with or without you.
yeah. It's not about your ego. It goes back to ownership, and possession. What things do adoptees need to hear? Is there something that adoptive parents can say to their adopted child regarding their name if it was different at birth?
Carrie, do
You
you
know,
have an
we
idea?
we
What do you think?
we say all the time like, oh, support them, encourage them, but I think sometimes people really need examples of like what to actually say. So if you guys have any suggestions.
Uh, well, Carrie, I say sometimes not saying anything is the best thing if you don't know what to
Okay.
say. Like if I come up to my parents and I'm like, hey, like, you know, talking about name and all these things. Sometimes questions are good, but you have to make sure that the question is um a good question. Is not, like a passive aggressive question, an intrusive
Yeah.
question. But sometimes just sitting and just saying, I don't know, like I don't know, that's interesting. There's power in that. And I think as Americans, we fill this space with a lot of talking.
A lot of
I say
noise.
that, that we're just humans, not Americans, humans, I apologize. But we just staying quiet. And then if you don't know, I mean, there are resources and we're trying to put resources out there to guide
Mm,
you. But I like you, I'm not being long-winded, but like you were kind of
good.
saying, Laura, with your husband, there are a lot of times when I am having a discussion with my husband and I get that little ping, like, oh, I'm about to devour him. He messed up, right? And I gotta breathe and be like, okay, what is
Yeah.
this? Do I want a relationship? Do I want to be right, or do I want to be in communication and loving and kind? And it's always the latter, right? Like I always want to be in a relationship healthy. So that's what I meant, like check your ego at the door, figure out what you want, which you want a relationship with your child,
Mhm.
and go from there. And your child will guide you and lead you.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what,
I think
go ahead,
just the
Karen.
honesty or just in I guess genuine support, especially as your adoptee gets older, like that they know that it's okay to voice their
Yeah.
feelings, like, and you can validate those feelings as an adoptive parent and not be insecure, or that they're just trying to express their feelings, and and just to have that support that the adoptive parent supports them, to where you're not 40 years old and trying to find all these things out because you've waited, so but support them from the beginning. And that's obviously going to look different as your adoptee gets older, but just I think growing up having that support and having that, I guess, blessing to, like, okay, you find out who you are, like, in giving them that freedom to do that without making them feel guilty or feel bad for wanting to know more about who they are, where they came from. So I think just that
Yeah.
genuine support.
Hmm.
And you
Yeah.
have to take a self look at why if I think if the adoptive family, if they're being defensive or they're about the naming, like why what is causing that? What does that stem from? Is
Ownership.
that it? Yeah. And what does that insecurity stem from? It doesn't
What's
stem
the
from,
root?
it's
The
right. What are
root.
the roots to that? Because
Yeah.
it's not necessarily what's happening right then.
It's
It's not,
something deeper.
it's something deeper. And
Yeah.
I think that we all kind of need to look back and care for ourselves. But that doesn't mean just um, wallow in my misery. It means thinking back as to why am I feeling this way? What led
Mhm.
to that? What led to that insecurity? And because what in my opinion, what you're doing as an adoptive parent, correct me please, Carrie, if I'm wrong. If you are getting, defensive and obsessive and possessive with the name and the child, it really leads back to there's insecurity there for some
Mhm.
reason.
I mean, like,
Yeah.
for our son, like, I want him to have something that came from, a name that came from his birth family. Like, I wanted that. Like, I desired that. And we
Because
did,
you
we
are
did come to that, but at the beginning, the conversation was very little, because obviously it's a hard conversation. And I was so excited to have that phone call. But then, his mom was like, she didn't know how to navigate that conversation, and her social worker wasn't extremely helpful, but I'm sure it put her in a difficult situation too, like uncomfortable, like, how do you talk about this beforehand? Like, this is not normal. But I think we need to normalize that. Like, it has to be talked about before you get to
Mhm.
putting a name on paper, and, like, just collaborate. I mean, working together, and then finding a way as an adoptive parent to honor their birth family, because that's going to mean so much more as that adoptee gets older, to know that they work, like, they got along, like they came up with a
Yeah.
name together. Like, it's gonna, I mean, and then, like, I think Lynn said earlier, it's something so small, but as we get older, like, it means so, I mean, it is, sometimes it's those little things that really mean the most to people.
Right. And
Yeah.
you made such a good point just now, like they work together. Like I never even thought about like how what you're, doing that and how, what it models to your child and hearing the stories. Like I think that's a really good point as well.
Yeah. And there's ways that you can go about doing this in a way that's not coercive, or, in a way that's collaborative. And we've been throwing out that word a lot, but that's really what it is. You can hyphenate middle names, you can combine names, even, you can work together to discuss maybe names that you have, that you share, familial names. Maybe
Mm,
you have a grandfather that has the same names. We see that a lot. I feel like I've
yeah.
that's pretty common.
Make
But
nicknames.
in nicknames, yeah, and we see the situations where the birth mom or the expectant mom chooses a name that she wants to call the child. And I know that that can get kind of complicated and at times, but really, if you break it down, the child doesn't know anything else, you know. So we're the adults, we're the ones that overcomplicate the situation. It doesn't have to be so complicated. And you also want to discuss like trigger names. There might be names that they associate with trauma too. So you need to have those conversations because you had no clue what names could cause some issues. And if you don't
Yeah,
have those conversations, that could be problematic,
that's
Yeah.
such a
you
good,
know?
such a good point.
Yeah. So there are a lot of things to consider during the naming process that I just think people are avoiding
Yeah.
because it's just really awkward. I mean, that's just what it is. And we need to stop pretending that it's not awkward. You know, even my conversation, we had one conversation surrounding names and nothing was really decided. I didn't really know what they were going to name my daughter. We had just told them what name we didn't want, and that was it. And so it wasn't until I had her that, and then they came to the hospital that they told us what her name was. And so, it's kind of this one little side conversation that we had, and there needs to be something more than that to
Yeah.
avoid conflict, first of all. And again, to show that they like can work together and that you do honor and respect one another. Because if we're gonna make adoption as holistic as possible, these are the steps that we have to take to do so. It starts at the beginning. What types of conversations are the agencies having with their adoptive parents and their birth parents? And we know that not always they can have these conversations. Sometimes there's drop-ins, sometimes it's last minute and you don't know. And then you've got the issues of like these crazy names that you have to navigate. And again, it should be the agency that is facilitating these uncomfortable conversations and say, hey, is there something that we can figure out? I really want this to work for you guys. This is a great stepping stone, like you said, Delora. So we've got to get used to having these conversations. But this was great, guys. I would love to hear any last minute comments about names in the adoption process. We can wrap up here in a little bit. If anyone has any last minute comments.
Well, I'll say in closing, I have learned to love my name. Blackbird, I know that the symbolism, and I know some symbolism is not a big deal for some people, but again, it's something that helped me just kind of figure out who I am. And then,
Mm.
my other name, meaning, wise flower. I do think I'm quite wise, but
Great.
I'm just kidding. But I think, yeah, names, like what is in a name? Everything. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's in it.
Mm.
And um, and to really think about the culture of the child as well, where they came from. Did they come from a Spanish background or African American background or whatever it is, like incorporating and realizing and honoring that and not seeing it as a problem, just seeing it as an opportunity to pay homage to your child's birth culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was recently talking to someone who chose a name for her child, and she was like, they're going to change it anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And I was like, no, you don't have to accept that. Like, we shouldn't have to accept that. You
Mhm.
can work together to figure this out. And,
Yeah,
thankfully they did honor and keep the name that she chose, but she was just kind of like, it is what it is. And it's like, we shouldn't accept that. We shouldn't accept the bare minimum in these
right.
situations, not
Mm,
just for us, but mostly for the child. And so that's just what this is about, not accepting the bare minimum and making this as holistic as possible.
And
But we'll wrap it up. Go
I
ahead.
think one more thing. I think um, if both the family and the adoptive family, especially the adoptive family, because they're going to be raising the child, would look at the fact that this is this is a way to ultimately build a stronger relationship with the adoptee and the adoptive parents
mhm.
because they are seeing how the adoptee is seeing that the adoptive parents were so willing to sacrifice on their part and to communicate and to collaborate and to work with the birth parents, and I think it just forms a stronger relationship.
Yeah, it does. And it kind of comes back. We've said this before and other things that we've done about you have to accept that when you're adopting a child, you can't parent the child like it's a biological child. They have different needs. And that's kind of what this comes back to. It's like you might have these names that you would give to a biological child, but this isn't the same situation. And you have to accept that. Doesn't mean that you have to compromise on everything, but you got to compromise on some things and you got to work together to figure it out. And, hopefully in the future, we will see a whole shift in the naming process. I would love to see that sooner than later. But these are the conversations and the topics and that are going to help make that change. So thanks guys for joining us today. Thanks for anyone who is viewing. Be on the lookout for more videos from us, more Roots series. We're really excited to get this going, and we are looking forward to seeing what else we could talk about. And if you guys ever have any suggestions for topics, let us know. We want to dive deep into a lot of these things and uncover the truths to the complexities in adoption.
And
So,
please be kind with your feedback. Thank you.
yes, we're sensitive. All righty. Thank you, ladies.
Bye.